Now we're going to move into what do we do if we see multiplication and division? Now this is always a little bit tricky. So say I'm looking for a number that when I multiply that number by 3, I get 18. What this is going to look like is 3 times x equals 18. Now we know we can use a dot to represent multiplication. We don't want to use a multiplication symbol in algebra because it looks too much like our good friend x. But we also need to know we can just write this value in front of the variable and we will know it indicates multiplication. This is saying 3 x's. 3x is x plus x plus x, or 3 times x is equivalent to 18. Now, you might tell me, well, I already know the answer is 6. And you might say that because 3 times 6 equals 18. Or you might tell me 18 divided by 3 equals 6. As you can see in this example, multiplication and division are inverse. Just like we saw before in the first example, that addition and subtraction are inverse operations, multiplication and division are inverse operations. So if you want to solve this equation algebraically, we would do the opposite or inverse operation of what we see. Now we know this is multiplication, it's a little bit hidden, and we know the inverse is division. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. The way you want to show this is by using a fraction bar. It's much cleaner than using a division symbol. Just like I don't want to use a multiplication symbol here because it looks like the variable, I'm going to use a fraction bar just to clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to say 3 times x divided by 3, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now think to yourself, what's 3 divided by 3? It's not 0, it's 1. So what this leaves me with is 1x. That's what I wanted. I wanted 1x by itself. And we know 18 divided by 3 is 6. Now, you don't have to write it like this, 1x. You can. 1 times x is just x. Now let's check this one so you can see what the check would look like. Remember, 3x indicates multiplication. So when I substitute the value of x in, I need to be very careful. I don't want to just do this because now it looks like 36, which is definitely not 18. So you can use a dot or you can use parentheses. 3 times 6 is 18, and this checks out. All right, the last one-step equation that I'm going to show you is what to do if you see a fraction or division. So imagine you're trying to think of a number that when you take half of that number, you get 6. This can look a couple different ways. It could look like this. Half of a number equals 6, but it could also look like this. Now remember, earlier I told you this fraction bar means division. So 1/2 times a value is the same thing as that value divided by 2. That's really important to understand. 1/2 times a value is the same as taking that value and dividing it by 2. So let's think back to earlier. We know that multiplication and division are inverse. So to solve this equation right here, I can use the inverse of what I see, which is multiplication. Now, some people might show this a little bit differently. Here's what I like to do. I put parentheses around the entire equation and just show that I'm going to multiply it by 2. Now, this is a little bit tricky. You have to think back to how to multiply fractions. Numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. 2x's divided by 2 is equivalent to 2 times 6, which is 12. Now we already know from the previous example, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and I get x equals 12. Okay, here is another way to show how to solve this type of equation algebraically. Say your teacher gives you 1/2 x equals 6. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I know this is multiplication. I need to use division to solve. Okay, now this is going to look a little weird. I'm dividing by a fraction. I'm dividing by a fraction. Now I have to think all the way back to when I first learned how to divide fractions. Well, I already know 1/2 divided by 1/2 is 1. So that's going to give me x equals. Okay, thinking all the way back to how I divide fractions. I need to use keep, change, flip. Keep the first fraction, change the operation to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. 6 times 2 is 12. And I get the same answer that I got before.